Hello and welcome to GREENFLEET Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for the discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Gray, Head of Alternative Fuels at Rivas.
Morning, Kate.
Morning, Sarah. Lovely to meet you.
Indeed.
So today we're going to be discussing the transition to electric light commercial vehicles. By way of introduction, Sarah, could you just tell me a little bit more about Rivas and your fleet management solutions?
Yeah, of course, no problem. Rivas Group managing around about 110,000 vehicles. So we've got around about 78 garages up and down the UK. Those garages are predominantly servicing light commercial vehicles and heavy goods vehicles, and our kind of main target that we use as a KPI really is the vehicle off-road time. So keeping those vehicles on the road is a massive factor for us. We deal with some really critical fleets that have to be on the road. They can't afford for vehicles to be off the road. So that's where Rivas really fleet management comes in. And as I say, that's our main priority, keeping critical fleets running.
Great. We haven't discussed this, but this is potentially where electric vans will come into their own, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So in Rivas, we've had to kind of make quite a few adaptations already in our workshop. So for example, we're rolling out charging infrastructure. So we've got around about 45 sockets installed at the moment, but there's lots more to be done. So by the end of the year, I hope that to be about 150 sockets. We've also had to upskill technicians because obviously there's accreditations called the IMI. So IMI level 3 and 4 is what we're heading for. So we've got, I think, about 140 or so trained technicians at this time in each garage, but we have got more to do there, and COVID really slowed that down for us. So we'll continue with the technician training. We've obviously had to invest in new equipment as well, so safety items, different diagnostics kits for electric vehicles. But I'm pleased to say we're making really good progress, and we are able to maintain electric vehicles. So whether those critical fleets are internal combustion engine or electric vehicles, we've got the capabilities in our garages to support those.
Right, exciting times without a doubt.
It is.
So I wanted to ask you about the recent challenges with vehicle supply, which has meant that with the long waiting times on new vehicles, a lot of fleets have had to hold on to their existing vehicles for much longer than they originally intended. What problems does that raise for them and for you, and how do you see this issue resolving?
Yeah, I mean, we see it all the time in our garages. So customers are used to ordering replacement vehicles at a certain time. So they might be on a 5 or 6 year kind of lifespan. And usually, we got to the point where we could order a vehicle sort of 3-4 months before the next one was due to replace. And we would expect that vehicle to arrive. And obviously that just doesn't happen now. So fleets have to be more planned. So if you are, expecting vehicles to defleet in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, I would say you really want to have a vehicle replacement or order. If they don't, what it means is we're seeing older vehicles in our garages. They require more service, maintenance and repair. They have to continue with things like safety checks and items. So we've got like a vehicle check app, for example, where our drivers can maintain, put different information into this app that maintains the safety checks and vehicle conditions, because as they get older, there is the requirement for potentially more servicing and higher costs. That all contributes to things like the total cost of ownership of running that fleet, which the business may not have budgeted for, essentially. Yeah. So it's all around the planning of the next vehicle. So I think, as long as you've got your pipeline in order that says these are the vehicles that need replacing and when, we can support customers with when they need to get those vehicles on order, to hopefully mean that these vehicles aren't getting too old, and the condition of them is still safe.
Yeah, and you want that pipeline to be as smooth as possible,
absolutely,
from an operational point of view. So thinking about electric vans, we are seeing now more vans coming onto the market, which is great, and the battery range is increasing. So for some fleets, range anxiety isn't quite a bigger barrier as it used to be. But what about the ease and convenience of charging? What do you see are the main problems with the charging network?
Yeah, I mean, we do still have issues with the public charging network. I think a lot of the early adopting fleets that we work with have been able to facilitate new vehicles for employees or drivers that take those vehicles to a home location to charge. So that's kind of like the first tranche. Anyone that can take the vehicle home, charge at home, that's a good starting point. And now we're getting to the point where actually there might not be those drivers available now. So we need to consider the public charging, and things like cost is really unpredictable. You've got so many different networks that how do you put that into your total cost of ownership model to say, one day you might be charging at 35p per kilowatt hour, the next day you might be charging at 60, 70, and obviously with the different price energy caps and everything else that's happening at the moment, even the home charging cost is unpredictable. So there is more that we can be done. I think in an ideal solution, in an ideal world, there'd be more collaboration so that these large fleet operators that have already adopted a number of electric vehicles may be able to open up their network for other fleet operators. Things like the costs, we could look at the cost of charging and somehow have more of a stable service there in terms of the cost measures and how to budget for those. But there are things that are happening, positive things that are happening, like the local EV infrastructure fund that we've just heard about. I think it was only last week, with the 20 million for probably 1,000 plus charging in charging sockets being installed. So there are positives happening, but I think there could be more done to help with the accessibility, making sure that those public charge points are up and running and they're not broken, and we know about them if they are broken, and then a bit more cost confidence, I'd say, for fleet operators, because they do need to budget for this. So having a top end price or something that they would have to pay or something like that would be ideal, but appreciate we are in kind of very difficult times at the moment.
Yeah, and you were saying about the local infrastructure projects. They are precursors to a much bigger fund, which will be released next year. And the idea is that these are learning projects and demonstration projects. So I kind of think this is a golden opportunity to make sure that vans are completely baked into what is being delivered across the country, because access for larger vans is a challenge with the existing infrastructure as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are pilot schemes, so this is the whole, this is the opportunity, isn't it? And I think if you speak to a lot of fleet operators or anyone that deals with vans, they would probably suggest that a lot of the charging infrastructure that's out there just isn't big enough. So even the space of getting a vehicle in is just not big enough. So once we've got this opportunity to pilot, let's use it, make sure that we are considering everybody, whether you've got kind of, wheelchair access, you've got a van, whatever it might be, we need to make sure that this pilot is really used to the best of its ability so that we can learn from it.
Absolutely. And I think, any fleet out there, you should be in touch with your local authority and asking them, what they're doing about vans and making sure that they're, part of the mix. So we know that many organisations already have a net zero plan in place, which include timelines on how they're going to transition to zero emission vehicles. But what advice do you have for fleets that haven't developed that plan yet? How should they start their transition?
It's all about kind of accessing the right information, because we've learned a lot in the kind of 5-10 years previous with cars and all the different myths and stuff that come out. So for a fleet operator with vans that hasn't even considered how they're transitioned to EVs, they do need access to information. I joined Rivas about 1.5 years ago, specifically to look at how we help and support fleet operators with the transition. So we've developed something called EVAS, Electric Vehicles as a Service, which starts with consultancy, and I think that's the biggest part that you can support with. So it looks at which vehicles they're running currently. Is there an alternative in the EV space, or do we have to look at a different make, manufacturer, model, etc.? What the capability of that vehicle in terms of the electric range? Where would that customer charge? How would they charge? What's the cost of that charging infrastructure? Once they've gone through the whole total cost of ownership modelling, understood which vehicle they should be adopting, how far the vehicle will actually travel in real world. So we've tested about 15 light commercial vehicles so far to understand how they perform in the real world. And I say real world because fleet operators will have to carry a load of, a payload of equipment on their vehicle. So it does have an impact on the range. So understanding how that vehicle actually performs is obviously key. And then once they've made that transition and got those vehicles on fleet and ready to deploy, it's about helping the operators or the drivers understand the technology. So a bit more driver engagement, which previously, if you give someone a internal combustion engine, here's your key to your diesel, off your pop, that has to change. People need to understand the vehicles, the technology, how they get the best out of them, how they charge them even, because if you take a vehicle you've never plugged it in before, the last thing you want to do is turn up at a public charging where you haven't downloaded the app, you haven't got the charge card that can access, and you don't know how to do it. So there's a bit more driver engagement, but this consultancy piece kind of helps them with the roadmap and gives them all these considerations, because the vehicle's the easy part. Vehicle availability is increasing all the time. It's only a couple of years ago we had a few electric vehicles, and now there's just so many, and a lot of fleets can transition. But yeah, there's a bit more support. I think the consultancy part is the main thing. Get that right up front, and then it will make a much more smooth transition.
Yeah, okay. And I totally agree, and this whole idea of just, get out there, speak to companies like Rivas, find out what support is available. The driver engagement, I think, is crucial from the word go, in that you don't want to spring a surprise on your existing employees having gone through all of this process.
Exactly.
But it's, you're right, there's so much opportunity. And you don't have to do the whole fleet all at once as well. I think this is about chunking it down into, which vehicles are right for today and what will be coming later.
Yeah, exactly. You might do this kind of upfront analysis and identify one vehicle, but actually in another 6 months, when you've got your next tranche of vehicles that need deploying, it could be a completely different vehicle that's available that's actually better fit for purpose, operationally fit for purpose, whatever it might be. So it's not about one thing up front and adopting that throughout. You need to continuously review the fleet, what vehicle choice there is or is available. Things like the batteries, have they improved? Can you get more range? What does that mean to the second-hand market for the vehicles that are on fleet? There's so much to consider, and fleet operators and fleet managers, they've got a lot to consider. And I think there's no point in sitting there and worrying about this sort of stuff. You need to reach out and get some support.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you've tested 15 vehicles, which is fabulous insight, real world insight, and I'm expecting that in a year's time that'll be a lot more than 15 vehicles. So
yeah, it's a continuous program for us, and we do so many different tests. We do up to 36 different tests per vehicle, so that might just be completely empty on an eco mode with no climate change, climate control or air conditioning on, etc., and then right through to full payload, roof furniture, on power settings, you name it. So there's lots of different tests to understand that how our customers treat their vehicles, what's it going to impact.
The best and the worst, but absolutely invaluable insight. And finally, Sarah, the latest results that have come through from New Automotive in terms of van sales in July suggest that 5% of all new vans sold were electric, and 93% are still diesel, which is a little bit disappointing. So why is that, and what are the challenges that fleets are still facing?
There still are the issues around things like, excuse me, like payload, for example. Can we do what we do today in an electric vehicle? And for a lot, I think the answer is yes now, but for others, it's like, actually, we need a full payload, plus we need to tow, for example, and the availability may not quite be there. So it's about, again, understanding what's coming to market. We're really close to lots of the OEMs to understand what products they've got available. We invite them into, we've got things like academies that we run. So we invite our customers in to meet some of these OEMs, understand a bit more information and stuff, what products are available. And we would love them to move to electric vehicles, but actually if they can't, and there's a valid reason why they can't, there are alternative fuels out there. So you've got lots of different things that you consider, especially in the heavies. So we deal with a lot of heavy goods vehicles as well, and there are options to go to low carbon fuels, but not quite zero emissions just yet. So there are different options, but again, it's about truly analysing your fleet, understanding how they're used today, if there is something available, and it's all within the data. So if you haven't got access to that data, or if you don't know where to start, again, speak to someone that's going to help. we've got data analysts that can have a look at information like that for you and understand how your fleet operates and if there are options for you to move across.
Do you think that that number could, if every single fleet looked at their data today and had consultancy from you, do you think that that 5% number could be higher?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it could. Yeah, I think there's people, you know, and I don't blame them, but they're sitting there and they're worrying about all these steps because it's not just the vehicle, it's the charging infrastructure. Once you've got the charging infrastructure perhaps in your depot, what about if those drivers need to take the vehicle home, or what about if those vehicles need to charge on the public? How do we gain access to those? There's so many different parts to this that I think people are sitting there and thinking, I'm not going to, you know, it doesn't have to happen yet. We've got till 2030 to consider this. If they had access to all the information, understand that there is a roadmap available and that there is support available, I think that number could be quite a lot higher, albeit we might have to wait a little bit longer, just because I think if we suddenly see a massive increase in demand, that's only going to mean that supply, these OEMs can't particularly, potentially keep up with the demand. So lead times could even be pushed out slightly more.
Yeah, I understand there is a bit of a catch-22, isn't there? But given that 2030 isn't that far away, it would be nice to see that number of EV registrations going up slightly quicker than it is.
Yeah, I think we do use the word challenges a lot of the time because there are challenges to move into electric, but there are also some really good quick wins where you just identify straight away that there's a population within the fleet that can transition very quickly and fairly easily. So we need to sort of remove that word challenge and start bringing more positives in, because we've definitely got fleets that are moving in the right direction at pace, and they are, they're success stories.
Great. Oh, well, thank you, Sarah. It has been a pleasure talking to you. Hopefully soon we'll be discussing some of those success stories in more detail. That is about all we've got time for. Thank you to Rivas for joining GREENFLEET Talks, and thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.